Hey, hi guys. We're just going to talk a little bit. I want to lecture a little bit on some of the things you're doing this week. I had a sound issue, so I had to redo it. So I'll post this today. But basically, the first part you guys already kind of completed, which is the qualities of good athletes. And I thought you guys did an excellent job kind of discussing what they put in the videos and also addressing, kind of your own thoughts. In my previous lecture, I had basically said, a lot of the things that I looked at for inequalities of athletes were things like coachability and how much more important that might be even than just someone who has a high skill level, and things like having a good attitude and being a hard worker. And a lot of times in regular psychology, we talk about the terms resilience, being able to bounce back when things go wrong. And grit is kind of similar, and grit is kind of like that ability to dig down deep and really overcome things and push through, and kind of a overall determination. And those things are really important for us in life, but I think ultimately very important for us in sports, because we, as you know, at some point you're going to lose, and how do people respond to that, and how do people react? And so much a part of that, when we look at athletes, is body language. How do they communicate with their teammates? Things like that. And so those kind of were some of the qualities that I had mentioned that were important. I liked some of the things that you guys brought to the table. I agree with the competitiveness. I agree with, being just that drive to be successful, and kind of having a ultimate plan and being able to visualize where you want to go with that, not just in sports but in life. But obviously it's very beneficial to us in sports. I knew from the time I was a junior and I kind of started playing some travel volleyball that I wanted to play in college, and I knew I wasn't the most athletic, or the most talented. And so I spent my summers on my own, getting up at 6 o'clock in the morning, and I would go lift weights and I would play volleyball for an hour or two with my friend. And that's what I did on my summer. And that was not necessary. But it was in my long-term plan. Um, so you guys kind of already did that assignment. There's still some responses that need to happen. I do just want to reiterate that when I have you summarize something or talk about the video, make sure I can tell that you watch the video. So give me specific examples, and then separate and do a second paragraph talking about your own thoughts. And do you agree? Do you disagree? And then when you go in to do your responses, make sure you're giving me a couple of sentences, again, on whether you agree, disagree with what the person's saying. And then if I ask you to do a question, that is something separate. So make sure you write a couple of sentences agreeing or disagreeing, um, and then do your question to them. And then remember, keep going back and looking, because I almost always respond and I almost always ask a question. And if you go in and answer those, that's where you can get some extra credit points, just to help your grade out a little bit if you want to. So keep that in mind. The next thing that you guys have coming up is the parental involvement discussion. And again, I just want to mention there's a lot of different philosophies on this, and depending on the level that you're at, that is what we're going to look at. So I think, I had you guys focus a little bit more on youth sports, and kind of the controversy there is how involved should parents be. Obviously, there's studies that show that parental involvement is beneficial in school and in sports in regards to providing that support system, in regards to, making sure the kids get to the activities, and encouraging them and things like that. When we start to see some issues is when that involvement becomes too much. The fights with the referees, yelling at the coaches, sitting in the stands and talking about what should be done different. There was a really good video I watched the other day on a big head coach. He's been a college basketball coach for a long, long time, and he basically said, I go to watch my kids play basketball, and he goes, I know I have more experience, more years, more knowledge than probably any of the officials or the coaches that are there. And he goes, but that's not my job at the time. My job is to be a parent, and that means I'm there to watch and support my child, and whatever that means. And if that means, he's sitting on the bench, or if he has a bad attitude, or whatever's happening, I address that as a parent, and I help my child through that situation, as opposed to attacking the coaches or the referees or anything like that. Because we all know in life things, I mean, you're going to come across controversy. You're going to come across times when, you know, it doesn't go the way that it really should. Life, you know, we always say life's not fair. And so if parents are always trying to, what they think is fix things for their kids, you know, get them more playing time or, you know, fight for them to have better opportunities, there's a fine line there because sometimes they're going overboard. And so I'm interested to hear some of you guys' thoughts on that too. I had an experience with it in college when I was coaching college, and I had a mom want to set up a meeting about her daughter's playing time. And I was like, this is college volleyball. We don't, you know, do that. But I talked to the player and I said, here's the deal I'll make with you. If you want me to sit down with your mom and talk to her about your playing time, then I'm going to tell her everything. I'm going to tell her what you're doing outside of volleyball that's affecting your play. I'm going to tell her what's happening in practice and the things that are going on with your attitude and why you're not on the court all the time. And if you want her to know all of that and how that has an effect on your participation in this team, then we'll have a meeting. And of course, you know, the player decided she didn't want me to meet with the mom. But I couldn't believe that at that level, I was still having to deal with that. High school level, I had a parent. I mean, I've had all kinds of stuff. I've been called names. I had a parent who I actually had a good relationship come to me one summer before their daughter's senior year and say if she didn't play a certain position, they were going to take her to a different school. And that was a girl I had coached for 3 or 4 years and was only where she was at because of me. But, you know, they had kind of gotten this big head about what was going on and had decided what was the right thing and wanted me to fall in line with that. You know, I think, like we said, in youth sports, you're seeing more and more parents, you know, questioning playing time and questioning what the coach is doing. And in my travel team, even just this year, you know, after a tournament, I called the other coach that I work with, and he was like, oh, the parents just love you and they think you're great and they love what you're doing. You know, their only concern was some of your timeouts. They didn't understand why you took them when you took them. And he was like, I just told him like that's a personal choice. And I said, it absolutely is. Everybody has a different strategy. There's no reason that parents should be talking about when I use my timeouts. Like that's my decision, and I choose to use them at certain times for a reason. And so that kind of stuff has always blown my mind. I will say this, I think if you really are going into coaching, the one thing that I have learned is something that alleviates some of that is setting very strict policies. So especially when I was coaching at the high school, I had a paper that they signed in the beginning of the year when I had my parent meeting, and it basically said these are the policies for contacting the coach. You know, you're not allowed to approach the coach before a game. You're not allowed to approach the coach after a game to discuss any of these issues. You know, you need to set up a meeting 24 hours in advance if you want to have a discussion. And we're not going to have a discussion if the child hasn't talked to me first. And a lot of that was me trying to kind of kill 2 birds with 1 stone. One was I didn't want to be ambushed by the parents, and I didn't want to have to deal with the parents. I wanted to deal with them as little as possible. But 2, creating a little bit of empowerment in the player to handle the situation themselves. And if you don't understand why you're not playing up, like ask questions, you know, try to figure it out before you know, run to mom and dad and have them fight your battles for you. And so that was pretty successful. So if you do go into coaching, that's something that you might think about. The other 2 things you guys are going to have to do is a practice plan and a game day plan. The practice plan, what I want you guys to focus on really is having an organized, timed, this is what we're doing at every single time throughout that time frame. And then you're going to also look up like some different conditioning and training programs that would be beneficial for your sport, and you're going to incorporate that. So you're going to have a typical practice, but you're also going to include some conditioning time. And like I said, be very specific. Include your water breaks, include your warm-up, include your cool down, all of those things that are important in a practice, because one of the things that is most beneficial in coaching is being organized, and being able to organize a practice is very important. I couldn't tell you how many times I've had players complain just about the logistics of practice. Like, oh, like when I coached at the college, the coach before me, that was the biggest complaint the girls had when I came in. They said we never had a plan. Like we would just kind of walk around, and then all of a sudden we would do this drill, and then we would walk around, and there was no focus, there was no plan, and so every day I came in with a paper, and sometimes my paper had a lot on it, sometimes it didn't, but it had times, it had drills, it had this is what we're doing. And I think just that one thing won a majority of them over from day one because it was already so different. And they just appreciated that I was putting in that planning time and that effort, which really didn't take a lot extra for me because I already knew what I was going to do. So I just wrote it down. And I think that's important, and so that's kind of what I want you guys to walk through is that process. So that shouldn't be too difficult. And then the other part is the game day process, and that's going to have a little bit more thought into it. But again, it's just about understanding how much more goes into a game day than maybe what you realize as a player. And so you have to think about things like who's going to work your game, match, whatever it is. For volleyball, we had to have someone taking money at the door. We had to have concessions. We did concessions as a fundraiser, so I had to have people to work the concessions, people to work the scoreboard, people to line judge, all of these different things. And so those were all things that I had to plan ahead of time and make sure we're taken care of. At the high school. At the college, that was a little bit different. Those things were handled for me. I didn't have to find those workers, which was kind of nice. But then you have to think about officials. Who's going to get your officials? Is that taken care of for you, or do you have to do it? What's the logistics of your day going to be? So again, in high school, you don't really have a lot to do with that. The day was the day, the kids did their school day, whatever. What we kind of had to plan was what time are they going to come back to the gym? We had to set up the net, make sure everything was ready to go, who was working, the different games. So a lot of times my varsity would work the JV game and the JV would work the varsity game, and we had to have all that lined out ahead of time. In the college, there's more encompassing type of things you have to do. So we had to, I had to make sure that they were eating at the correct time, be prepared to play. If they're playing at 7, maybe I want them eating at 2 or 3 because I want a few hours to digest, but I want them to have had some sustenance. So making sure they're eating at the right time, making sure that's provided for them. So again, if I have to do any of the logistics, making sure that's all taken care of. Some other things you have to think about that a lot of people don't until the time comes is music. Are you going to allow it? If you allow it, are you going to monitor it? Things like that. What about the national anthem? Are you going to have somebody sing it, somebody play it? Are you going to even have your team outside during the national anthem? A lot of teams now, coaches are choosing to keep their team in the locker room because they don't want to deal with the controversy that's kind of going on in our country right now. So, well, what are you going to do about that? Are you going to do a pregame prayer? And a lot of that depends on where you're at too. The high school, I never did that because I was in a highly Jewish community. The college, I did it every single match, every single meal because I was at a Christian college. So you have to think about some of those things. Also, if you're doing any type of specialty night, a senior night, a breast cancer awareness night, a teacher appreciation night, anything like that, all of those logistics you would have to plan as well. And basically just making sure everything runs smoothly. Are you going to do any type of promotional activities, in between games or at halftime or in a break of the meet or whatever it is? Are you going to throw out t-shirts? Are you going to do any of that type of stuff? And so I'm just wanting you guys to kind of work through those processes and put together a written plan for what you think, would happen and how you would try to organize and run that day. If you're doing travel, again, very similar, but you're going to maybe have some differences. Again, you're going to have to think about what time are they going to have to show up. My travel volleyball tournaments, a lot of times we start playing at 8 o'clock. I make them be there by 7 so that we can warm up and do this and do that. And then what's going to happen for food? Are the parents going to go get it? Are you going to provide it? those types of things. And the logistics for that are a little bit easier because you're not dealing with, paying for the refs and this and that, but just keep those things in mind. And the only other thing I wanted to mention is just make sure, again, on your discussions, you're giving detail enough that I know if you've watched a video, I know that you've watched it. Make sure in your responses you're giving a couple of sentences and then also adding in a question. Make sure you go back in and look, because if someone's asked you a question and you answer it, then you can get bonus points. And you guys are already almost through like a third of the class. Coming up in the next, I think you still have one more week where we're just doing some assignments and discussion, and then the following week is when you'll finally have your first quiz. I did start to put some notes on there starting next week. If I have you watch any videos, make sure you're taking notes on them, very detailed notes, because those things are a big part of your test besides any of the PowerPoints I post, because you guys don't have a book. So a lot of that stuff is going to come from the videos and then the few like notes and PowerPoints I have you guys look through. So if you have any questions, make sure you're contacting me. You guys are doing a great job. And hopefully you're enjoying it, because I really like the conversations that you guys are having and some of the stuff you're posting on your discussion. So great job.